So for my environmental science paper, I did my research on fast fashion. And what fast fashion really is fashion that is made very cheaply, quickly, and is very easily disposed of. And it really comes from is this consumerist movement and globalization movement in the 80s and 90s. And consumerism being that there's more money in the hands of people to spend it. And then globalization is, of course, the textile industry moving outside of the US and into developing nations and China. And one particular retailer that really perpetuates this fast fashion model is Zara. And the ways Zara's CEO, Amancio Ortega, how he deals with this model is really in two ways. He says that first, we're going to knock off major high end trends from the runways, and we're going to make these knockoffs and we're going to sell them. And the second aspect is dynamic assortment, which he says is selling new things every day, every week, and to get consumers coming back to the shops to buy more. And that is what's been making the fast fashion model so successful in the term that for these companies, these retailers, they are successful in making a large amount of profits. However, there's a really big effect that fast fashion does have on our environment, and it's the garment life cycle that I talk about in my paper. And the garment life cycle starts from the beginning, from raw materials all the way down to where it lands into the consumer's hands, and we buy it and then we get rid of it. So starting with raw materials, that first step in the life cycle, I talk a lot about cotton, and specifically how cotton is very water intensive. The crop needs to be irrigated. How cotton especially uses a lot of pesticides and herbicides, which are bad for the soil and for insects that really are helpful in those ecosystems, and how those pesticides and herbicides and insecticides actually make their way up to the food chain and can actually make us sick. The second step in this cycle that I talk about is non renewables, and that's specifically with the fabrication of polyester. Polyester is made from petrochemicals, so oil, lots of crude oil, and because of such a rapid demand for these fabrics, these man made synthetic fabrics, um, the fast fashion or the textile industry is actually making up 10% of all our carbon emissions, which is actually quite a big chunk of them. The third step in this cycle that I talk about is the dyeing process. So after cotton is fabricated into fabric, so is polyester, it has to go through some very intensive dyeing processes, and these dyeing processes create large amounts of wastewater. Cotton is specifically very hard to dye, so is polyester. Cotton has to go through a lot of baths, chemical baths, one of them being bleaching, and they have to be dyed multiple times in order to get um, to the consistent color and pattern that the manufacturers would like it to be. Polyester is the same way. It is especially hard to dye, and it just really creates large amounts of wastewater that is later emptied out into water resources near these textile industry plants, and that water is being released and also get like is also damaging the ecosystem, the organisms living in the water, around the water, and communities can no longer even use this water to for themselves. So this presents a really big problem, especially when water filtration systems are very expensive, and a lot of this is happening in developing nations where it's already hard enough for them to maintain standards. So the last step that I talk about through the garment life cycle is the disposal aspect. Now, in terms of disposing clothing, a lot of people do, and we're all very well aware of this, is that we give our clothes to a thrift shop. And the hidden truth behind that is that only about 1/5 of all clothing, so either whether you donate to Goodwill or St. Vinny's, is actually being sold. Only about 1/5 of that is being sold. And so, what these secondhand stores have to do in order to make a profit is really they either send their clothing to a textile recycler or they ship it overseas. And so, with a textile recycler, they send it to the recycler, and the recycle processes the garments, and they often use the garments as rags or as insulation, but only about 15% of that is being recycled. So a large quantity of what is left is actually being shipped overseas to developing nations especially in Africa. And when these garments get overseas, they're actually being shipped in 100-pound bales. And the merchants in Africa buy these bales, and they have to sort through whatever they bought. And they don't even know what they're buying because they can't really see within the bales. They just buy whatever they can. And so they sort through these clothes, and a lot of times the clothing is already stained or ripped, and they can't really sell it in their own markets. So they end up burning the clothing. Or it gets into their own landfills in their countries. So this cycle of fast fashion, this life cycle, is very harsh on our environment. And that was very shocking to learn because, as I'll talk about later, um, I would have never, before this research, I would never had think it went that far. So, apart from all this judgmental aspects, I also talk about stability or sustainability. And sustainability in the garment industry really has to start from the top and work its way down to the bottom. So it has to start from designers making clothing that is already eco-friendly, or see them making clothing that is sustainable for consumers, sustainable at the raw materials level, the dyeing process, the fabrication of other fabrics, at the disposal level. They have to ensure that this garment is going to be sustainable. One thing that we really can do as individuals with clothing is buy less of it. Just out of pure awareness, we have to buy less clothing and stop buying so much, because that has been the consumer trend. Is because of this fast fashion model, we're going to stores a lot more often and we're buying more often, but we're likely to get rid of things more often. We could also go back to mending and sewing, mending things, altering things when things no longer fit, or sewing something that is so slightly easy to fix. That could save lots of clothing from ending up in landfills. And also going to thrift stores, seeing alternatives in purchasing new clothing, going to thrift stores, or just buying at least one garment from a thrift store can really help reduce our carbon footprint. So, some last things I'd like to address in this short little presentation is that I didn't get to talk about a lot of the globalization aspect in the textile industry. And globalization has really changed the industry for the better and for the worse, because us as consumers, we can purchase things at a lower cost. But of course, I talked a lot about the environmental aspects and how energy intensive it is, and how it's very detrimental to our environment and is contributing to climate change. But there's also an aspect that globalization I didn't really address, and that's the workers. The workers that are in working in the industry are paid very low wages. Their safety is often a concern because they handle the dyeing, they handle the raw materials, they handle fabrication. And so a lot of that is becoming very detrimental to them. And these communities that are around these textile industries a lot, I talked about it briefly with the water situation. They're not having access to resources, valuable resources for their own health. And then lastly, I'd like to just address my own experience through this. I became very conscious and aware of all the impacts that fast fashion actually has on our community and our ecosystems. And it was a good thing because this project made me realize all those impacts and has changed my behavior for the better. I actually used to be a very avid shopper. I'd go to H&M a lot of the time. It would be my favorite store. And actually H&M is one of the retailers that is perpetuating fast fashion just like Zara. And so having this knowledge now, I feel very proud of myself and very aware that I can change the world for the better by doing my part in not taking into account this consumerism, this fast fashion model, being a participant of it. And I'm so proud that I got to learn and now share this information I have with other people and have them become aware of this this fashion disaster, as I say in my paper. So the research was very useful to me, and it's changed me for the better. And I hope that everything that I talked about is insightful.